My name is Louis Latour. I'm working for FHIR as a DevOps, and it's my pleasure to introduce one of my colleagues who will speak about dealing with multi-tenancy, and I think I should say also it's Matt Osmanski. And
Thank you, Louis. All right, thanks everybody for coming here to learn about multi-tenancy a little bit and how we do it in FHIR, or one of the ways that we solve it. Actually, there's kind of multiple ways to solve it depending on what your use cases are. I've worked in health tech for like 17 plus years, mostly on interoperability and quality projects. And a lot of that is just trying to find solutions and ways to solve problems. And a big part of that is finding cost efficiencies, and multi-tenancy kind of allows that. I put on here that I play as much golf as I can, just in case there's any other golfers that come to other events. Maybe we can plan out, there's one, plan in the future. So the agenda today, we're just going to go over what multi-tenancy is, some of the common multi-tenancy models that are out there. If you've worked in software implementation and web services, you've probably already seen multi-tenancy before. The key design considerations related to FHIR, and then some of the implementation strategies, and some example implementations that we have and how we kind of solved it using the meta security label within FHIR, and then some patterns and some Q&A at the end. So what is multi-tenancy? Many of you probably already know this, but it's a software architecture where a single instance of an application can serve multiple tenants. The tenant could be anything. It could be a customer, could be organizations that you want to split things out, teams, could even be FHIR use cases. So there's many ways that you can decide. And you might not want to do multi-tenancy in production, but in test or staging environments, it might be much more cost-effective to put it in that environment. So the three most common models are share everything, where everything is shared by the tenants, the application layer, the networking, the integrations that go with it, the configurations, everything goes with the same tenant setup. Then sometimes you might need to split out things like the database. Maybe you have to have data isolated in different database environments, or it could be the application. So I know with a FHIR server, we have a lot of configurations at FHIRly. It doesn't always work for all the use cases, so sometimes we have multiple FHIR applications running on top of the same database layer, because maybe one needs to be private, maybe one's for bulk exporting, so it might take a lot of, the application itself might take a lot of use. And other times, sometimes there's a lot of database action and contention, so you have to split out the databases themselves, because if someone's hitting the server over and over again with a lot of requests, you don't want that database to be kind of bogged down waiting for it, so you split out the databases instead. And then in FHIR, there's a lot of regulation about privacy and data security. So sometimes you just have to isolate everything. So you have to know that sometimes multi-tenancy is not actually an option that you can have. And you should consider that. But you can still do it in the lower environments where it's not real actual patient data. So we have some common multi-tenancy models. There's like a matrix. You could either share everything. That's going to, isolation, there's not going to be any of that really in there when you share everything. The complexity is going to go way down. Your deployments, your testing, your support, maintenance, all that stuff is way easier and less complex. The cost efficiency is high. You can share the compute resources, memory, all of the other types of stuff, the database layer. And when you do that in the cloud, it's obviously cheaper to share all that stuff. And then the flexibility is kind of low when you share everything. But the scalability is high. And when I say scalability, I mean the ability to add new use cases or new tenants in the environment. Makes it quick to scale. And then you also only have to manage like one compute environment, so you can either just add some more memory or compute power or CPU to the server. Then share the app, isolate the DB, or vice versa. It kind of falls in the middle of everything. It really depends on how complex your solution ends up being. And then lastly, isolate everything. The cost is going to be the highest, but the isolation is also high, and that might be a requirement. It might be a government requirement. In the US market, we have a lot of data privacy. We have what's called HIPAA. So you really have to maybe isolate everything so nobody can have access to that patient data unless they really need it. But the flexibility that it gives you with isolated environments is obviously much more improved. So as I kind of mentioned just a minute ago, but security and data isolation is probably your most important consideration when you're deciding what multi-tenancy model is going to work for you. Sometimes the regulations will force you to isolate everything. But as I said, you can still take advantage of it in your lower environments. I'll show you a good example here that you can take advantage of in a few moments. You have to be able to identify the tenant. So commonly what we use is either the header in the HTTP header, or we actually use something in the identity token, some kind of claim or something like that before they access the server to identify the tenant. How much customizations do you need per tenant? If you're deploying FHIR for a use case for many different tenants, it's all the same use case. You don't need to really customize the server, how many resources are returned back, different things, functionality, how much access somebody has. It's much easier to share the environment, but if you have to configure all that differently, it's not quite as easy to handle. You always have to think about scalability and resource management. Some use cases might have 1 billion resources. Some use cases might have only a few thousand. Putting those in the same environment and doing multi-tenancy might not really work out because one of your tenants is going to use all the resources and the other tenant might only bother every once in a while. And you always have to think about, too, like how you're going to observe the tenants, too, because you probably have to have some logging and stuff around that and track how much they're using with it. It does really help to have multi-tenancy with deployment and DevOps strategies, because then you're always just managing like one server configuration, one server environment. So it can be much more efficient in that sense. And especially if you have tenants in all different application layers, so they can't share, it becomes kind of unwieldy. I mean, we have some customers that have 3 or 4 applications at different levels of FHIR server, and it's so hard to make sure that the customizations work at each one of those tiers in supporting it. So implementing multi-tenancy, you're probably going to have some type of middleware, and I think, I know Darren Devitt's seminar, he mentioned that everybody kind of needs an API gateway or proxy server that kind of gets in the middle, and that server is going to serve as like the front door. It's going to tell you which tenant is coming in, and you can manage that. As I said, we use like the headers and the claims. Your authentication or your identity providers probably need to know who the tenant is so they can actually add it to their access tokens. And then your database strategy, how you're going to split out the tenants so that the data is separate. Depending on what the requirements are, you could just do row-level isolation, where the tenant ID is on every column within the database layer, or you could separate out by schemas within a database. And lastly, I mean, sometimes you just have to have a different database per tenant. Maybe a database has to be in the EU, another database has to be in the US, which we kind of, with the data privacy meeting that we had the other day was interesting and something I would definitely consider. Then there's the infrastructure considerations. Once again, this kind of goes back to observing your different tenants. Maybe they need different namespaces or isolated resource groups within the cloud, so that way you can track how much the resources they're using. Maybe you have to charge the different business divisions or different customers a certain amount based on what they're using. And back again, the monitoring observability. You're going to want metrics and all that stuff to see how much they're actually using the system. Eventually, a tenant might become so busy that you have to decide now it's not time to migrate them to an isolated environment because they really can't fit with other groups and use cases. So the share everything model. This is probably, like, as I said, the most efficient. A lot of times you have to pre and post process requests that come into the FHIR server. You want to give it the appearance of a unique tenant within that configuration. Maybe for one reason, we want the business to feel like they have their own data and resources. They have their own URL, so it's easy to follow. They have their own path because it's a particular use case. So you can use provide that, and with that path, you can use what's called X-forwarded host, which is a standard HTTP header, and then X-forwarded prefix, which we use ASP.NET Core, so this is just a standard middleware. The prefix is kind of like a path, which I'll show you on the next slide. So here, we might have a deployment in the Azure environment. The front-end host or the proxy server will manage multiple hosts and paths. So the end users or the clients that are seeing the server are going to see that it's coming to pair1fire.org and then /provider directory. So to them, that's probably seems like they have multiple FHIR servers. It could be many URLs similar to this that are mapped. But the actual FHIR host is that crazy name that Azure just gives it right when you deploy it in your environment. So, and then you can see these are the 2 pieces that are going to make it up. So if you have a proxy-aware FHIR server that knows how to handle this, then all the references that come back from the resource are going to have that absolute reference that looks like it came from the original URL that was used. If you don't have a proxy-aware FHIR server that can't manage that, then you're going to end up with that crazy name, and the user might not even have access, or the clients might actually have access to reach the actual Azure host, so they would get blocked if that happens. So it's important that your FHIR server be proxy aware, or that you have something that manages the response and request to go and fix all this stuff. That's probably not ideal because it might slow down the performance quite a bit. So if the proxy can do it, or the FHIR server itself can handle this, it's much more efficient. So what we did is we take advantage of the meta security label. So we just add in, this is the system that we use, and then we just add tenants in here on all the resources that go into the server. We don't actually change the response or request. We have a configuration for us, but anybody could kind of maybe manipulate it with a front end or middleware. And all you can do is like whatever request comes in from the clients, you could always just have the security filter added to it as part of the parameter in the request. And then you absolutely must not allow any request to come in if you have multi-tenancy that does not have the context, whether it's in the header or in the identity token that comes across. Because if you allow that to happen, if you don't have some way to block that, then that's going to lose the security. Then the shared app or DB, we see this configuration a lot with FHIR server deployments. The reality is that we have different configurations, different use cases. One might be like an internal system that accesses the FHIR server, and one might be a public-facing like provider directory. One might need to be authenticated, the other one might not. So they really run the same data layer, but they have to have two different use cases, so you can kind of design it this way. And the proxy server can forward requests depending on what request is coming in and what client's sending it. But sometimes tenants are also too large or have different data residency requirements or isolation. So then at that point, you might be able to have a single FHIR application layer. So this probably comes into happen the most when you have like a facade layer, and then you could have different connections on the raw data where it is. So that way you could send one data set to Europe, one to the US, or something that's like a clinical data is here, and then public provider access directories down here. Whatever it is that you need to do, you can split out. There's so many use cases and different reasons to have multi-tenancy that there's not one way to solve it. And then the last thing is just isolate everything. This is just a reality sometimes in the production environments and the requirements of the regulations for the territory that you're on. So sometimes this has to be the decision that you make. Maybe it's only in production that you do this, and then in your low environments like test and development, you can share the resources, but then when it comes to production, you have to do this. So it might still save some deployment considerations in the lower environments, but you still have to manage 3 different servers that may be FHIR servers that might be at different levels. So in summary, I mean, there's many options when it comes to your multi-tenancy. I think security data isolation is probably the most important requirement, depending on what you're doing. You have to balance the cost effect of multi-tenancy and sharing stuff, how flexible your systems need to be, how many unique situations you need to handle. So you got to choose the model based on the business and technical requirements. And then plan from day one that you might eventually have to migrate someone from your multi-tenant environment into an isolated environment. There might just be something that happens where they hog all the resources or something like that, and you decide that it's easier to just split them out to somewhere else or to their own environment. A common thing we see a lot of times is that they have FHIR environments for each region that's out there in the world. It's more efficient, right, to send requests locally than it is to send it across like to Australia from here or something. So you can reach me at my email or come to LinkedIn anytime. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. I think there's already one question there.
All right, thank you. Yep. All right, I have a few questions. So first, for the security part, so is it possible to have multiple security tags, or this one, or this one, or this one, for example?
You could have security tags. I mean, it depends on your middleware and how you design it to make that work. And you certainly could have OR statements that you attach to it. I tend to stay away from it just more for security concerns that you're tagging multiple things. But you could theoretically have multiple tags on the data itself. But I get a little bit nervous sharing security, so it's only like if you must do that, I would say. And same thing with the claim. It could come in on the access token. You could have multiple claims as well. Sometimes it gets a little bit more difficult in the query that actually gets executed against the server when you have multiple security claims on it. We could probably do it in our environment. I haven't tried it yet, but because we just do like where security label equals this, because we have control of the database layer for us. I don't know if you would have that control if you're using like an open source FHIR server or something like that, but it can probably be done, just a matter.
All right, and other question is how it works for the security on put and posts.
What's that?
So when you post a new resource, so you will automatically put the security on it?
Yep.
Or and then on a put, if the security doesn't fit, we will not be able to update the.
So it depends. Yeah. So we have it so that if it doesn't have a tenant on it, it doesn't execute. It will stop it right there. But you can control how we get the header on it. So it might be the middleware that adds the header to it based on what like IP address it comes from. If you have control of the client, you can make all the clients put the header on it. There's different ways you can kind of identify where the request is coming from, and then you can just add it to the header. The best way is probably to use it in the tenant claim that comes along with the access token. That's probably the safest way.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Quick question: when does it make sense to split them into their own environment versus scaling horizontally and auto balancing and load balancing in a single environment?
It's a very good question, and it's one that we get all the time. It's sometimes hard to decide what the right approach is. It depends on the compute environment that you're constrained to. So if you're in the cloud, and this one tenant is very expensive, and they have to go to like this really high tier of software or of the compute and memory, it probably makes sense to split them off, and that way the cost sharing will be done directly between you, the FHIR implementer, and then the customer. So it's not like a straight answer. But if you do have more control, and it's like in a local deployment or something like that, you might be able to just keep them there for a while. So it's kind of on a case-by-case basis.
Hey, so I have two questions. One, do you have a tenant with multiple FHIR versions?
Yeah, we can support multiple FHIR versions in ours.
Okay.
Not everybody can. I don't know. It depends.
Okay. And the second question, why not use the tenant ID in the URL?
Well, because the URL, that's kind of like sharing. We don't always want to share who the tenant is, so we actually, on our server, we have a configuration so that you can actually remove the claim from the resources on the way out. So sometimes the tenant ID itself might be secure, and you don't want to share that information to possibly other tenants that are in there. They might be able to guess it if it's not sufficiently random or something like that.
Thank you.
Thanks for your talk. So I was wondering, how do you enforce proper access control? Like, for example, imagine I could send a search query, say that return me all male patients, which half of them are from the other tenant. How do you control that I only access data that belongs to me? And then also, I could send an update request that I'm updating the security tag to mess with your tenant tagging. How do you stop that either?
So that's something that we solve. You might have to solve it in your middleware, but we have like a feature or configuration where we say what tags are actually the tenant tags, and you're not allowed to like just put it in there unless you're going. We have a tool that loads it directly to the database. It's the only time you can tag it directly. So in theory, you might be able to do the same thing, I would say, with like middleware. You could probably just see if the security tag is in there that has whatever you're going to use as your tenant filter, and then either reject the request at the proxy layer or do something else with it or filter it out. So that's kind of how. What was the other question? There was one other one.
Search, like, give me all male patients.
Oh, all male patients. Yeah, so the way we do it, because we have control of the database layer, it's not like a facade. So we actually will just put in it in the where clause, like where the tenant is this and is male or depending on what the statements are. But there's always like a filter on the tenant ID itself that we use as like an identifier, so we can filter it out there. So it's not really possible to reach other tenants' data, how that happens. So, and the other way I showed was kind of in the URL. You could just put it as a filter automatically. You could append the request to put in the security filter on it as one of the parameters.
Thank you. My question is continuation of previous one. What if, can you go to a slide where you're showing examples where we share everything? Yeah, I think it's pretty, to forward, yeah.
This one?
Yeah, this one. What about cases when you're trying to create new resource using put operation with ID that already exists in database? So in this case, I think it's a security issue because you shouldn't be allowed to do it because this ID already exists. So without tenant ID in URL, you can't achieve ID uniqueness across all tenants.
So for us, the ID has to, if you're going to use multi-tenancy model, the ID has to be probably a GUID that's like generated on the fly, or you might have to use a composite key that has like the tenant in it and then turn that into a GUID.
But as far as I know, you can provide ID inside put, and in this case, you must create a resource with this ID. I'm not sure.
Well, the way that we do it, if you do put the ID in it, we reject it if it already exists. So it'll be a duplicate. It is one of the problems that you have to kind of handle, and we tell people to use a complex GUID that would not be replicated in a different environment. And then when we store it in the server, we don't use the absolute URL most of the time in the server. I mean, you could turn that on if you wanted to, but we usually just use like the reference URL.
I think, yeah. Last question.
In Farley's experience, which approach is most common, the shared server or the multi-servers?
Probably, I mean, my experience is that's usually a multi-server environment. We did just have a customer that was multi-server, and we were getting exhausted with the DevOps process of keeping the servers up to date, and so we figured out a way to actually move it to a single server with the tenants and have different use cases, but it depends. I mean, it's really a complex problem that depends on the use case.
So I will stop for now. We've reached the time, but if you have further questions, don't hesitate. Put the question on Wova, and again, feel free to fill in the feedback form. Always useful for the speaker and for us. So thank you.